Something that is quite interesting, though, is that the screen, when you're making the selections, is saying that quality mode targets 1440p and performance mode targets 1080p, but that just seems to be like a remnant from whatever
Maybe
version.
Series S has those selections.
Yes,
Yeah.
that was what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Yes, but yes, I couldn't really tell the difference between quality and performance, and there were performance issues. Yes, it seems to be that the game is both CPU and GPU limited, I would say, because when there's a lot of entities in firefights and when you're traveling at speed across the environment there, you are seeing performance drops, which is indicative of kind of what we saw almost on PlayStation 4 in a way, and Xbox One consoles. So I think there's work to be done there. What else can I say about the dogs mode? Yes, obviously in the Nintendo Direct footage, when you kind of emerge from the Dogtown black market into that area here, you can see that performance drops to 23 frames per second. And you'll note, Oliver, in the footage I said that I actually went to that area and did a slow pan left-right to kind of show potential performance problems there. So there wasn't really any that I could tell. It seems to be pretty consistent. So the build may well be different to the one that was in the Nintendo Direct, or it may well be the case that just the lighting conditions, time of day, game conditions may well have been different there. But even so, and I should say that in the black market itself, there was still variable performance. I think it was quite brave of CD Projekt Red to actually provide that as the save game location. If I was CD Projekt Red, I would have just stuck you at some area of the original game. Which brings us on to the handheld footage, because I did actually play a bit of the beginning of the original game there. Admittedly, most of it is in indoor areas, which are less taxing on performance. In Phantom Liberty, when we went on a mission, there was a firefight in indoor conditions that, when I was playing docked, that actually seemed to play okay. But handheld, the original Cyberpunk, just sort of going through some of the areas at the beginning of the game that actually seemed to run fine. So I think there may well be a divide between original content and Phantom Liberty content. Can't really say because obviously the game's still early in development. Handheld experience, though, interesting. Again, I went into a sort of open world firefight and performance dived. Again, I think it's similar to the kind of issues that we saw with the last gen versions in a way that you seem to be hitting a CPU limit there. But one thing I will say, which you can't really show in this footage, it's the HDR. Now, the quality of the screen on Switch 2 is great, but I'd say it's not OLED class by any means. However, the aesthetic of Cyberpunk with those neon lights, it really seemed to pop on the mobile screen. I thought that looked really, really great. And it does seem to run well in some scenarios, based on what we've both seen from that footage. So if we're talking about a basis from which CD Projekt Red are working from towards the final product, I'm slightly concerned that it's a launch product and there's not a long time until we get to launch. But at the same time, as an early work in progress, dated code already, there's grounds for optimism, I think, here. But I do think maybe we do need to be cognizant of the fact that this is Cyberpunk 2077. It's the benchmark game, almost. And the concept that they're going to be running this on a handheld that seems to cap at 10 watts, the concept that we're seeing anything playable at all here, I think is quite remarkable, even in this early form.
Yeah, and I'd also suggest here that I think with CDPR, with Witcher 3, and with the original launch version of Cyberpunk 2077, we're kind of used to their games launching with pretty big performance issues on consoles. And this is code that's like already 7 weeks old, almost 2 months old, and we've got about 2 months until launch. There's some room, I'm sure, for optimization and improvement here, and I would hopefully expect this to improve substantially. But yeah, in some of those areas, in Dogtown in particular, you're engaging like this massive firefight with, I think, more enemies than I've seen in the base game for sure. So that just seems brutal. I'm seeing like, probably 12 little red dots, 15 red dots on the player HUD there. That seems like a pretty intense load. But yeah, in general, this is just like the worst of all stress tests. I think Alex also observed that on PC, this open world Dogtown area is really tough to run. But I think on that display topic there, going through his footage, I think that it's a little bit hard to see exactly how good those highlights look in this footage, just because the fact that the camera's dynamic range is maybe not a huge amount of dynamic range, but certainly we are seeing, as we suggested in last week's direct, we are seeing a little bit of that raised black level in dark content, kind of like an IPS glow, or in this case an LTPS glow possibly, where we're getting that contrast level is not 100% perfect like we would see on an OLED. I think in general, you'd probably suggest that a good OLED display, especially a good OLED display with high quality HDR like the Steam Deck OLED, is a fair shot better than what we're seeing here, even if this is a pretty good display, all things considered.
Yeah. A couple of other sort of housekeeping points. DLSS, everybody's talking about it with regards to Cyberpunk, and we're going to kind of talk about it a bit later with another topic that we've recorded a bit further on down the line. It was a sort of non-committal response from CDPR, kind of, we'll get back to you, because there's been various reports that it's in there, that it isn't in there, and I didn't get any kind of indication on site by looking at it or by speaking to the PR that we know one way or the other. But there is an interesting thing that I'd like to raise. A couple of things. First of all, when I went to see the game, something was wrong with it, and it turned out, for example, the quality mode was running at 60 frames per second, and it looks awful. And it turned out that the displays had been reset, and they were basically on like storefront settings, and you know how bad they are, over sharpened, motion smoothing on, which is why, Tom was looking at it and thought, what's going on here? Surely they're not doing frame gen. And I guess it was frame gen in a way, but from the display. So basically the alarm was raised with Nintendo, and they came along and reset the displays, and everything started to make sense there. The second thing we're going to be talking about later is kind of like some simulations of the kind of GPU power that Switch 2 has got to work with in mobile mode, because it's kind of like the big unknown. And we use Cyberpunk as an example there, and I think you'll see some quite stark differences from my projections to what we're seeing here. And I think it's simply because I was targeting 30 FPS with DLSS no matter what. So, the resolution range for the DRS, the dynamic resolution, was like 50 to 100%, like 50% at 7, and I was targeting 720p, so 50% would be upscaled 360p, which doesn't look great in some scenarios when it does go down that far. Obviously, I don't think the DRS range is that high based on the demo that we saw, because the quality of the footage was generally quite good. Image quality, I thought, was generally quite good. So there may well be some changes there in terms of how they tackle dynamic resolution, or maybe not. Maybe they'll just have to stick with the variable performance, or they can actually optimize. And obviously, the stuff that we're doing later on in that segment will effectively have no CPU limitation. Exactly. I think there is a CPU limitation on Switch 2. But overall, early work, promising in many regards, obvious sort of hurdles to overcome. But this is a CD Projekt Red. They've not farmed it out to an external developer. They're doing it themselves. So I'd say there's grounds for optimism here, but also I guess we need to be kind of realistic that this is a power-constrained device by design. And the game was never designed for this level of hardware. It was designed for something quite different. So they've essentially had to, bring over what they've done already to Switch 2. They can't design for the device in the same way that Nintendo can. But that's it. That's my impressions. Final thoughts, Oliver?
I think overall this is like, it's a good effort insofar as it shows that the visual target is comfortably, I think, in that last generation range. It's just the performance level that we're seeing at the moment is not quite up to that standard necessarily of where we want it to be. But, in the fullness of time, I would expect this will probably improve by a good margin. Hopefully by launch we'll have a good playable 30 FPS experience. If not, maybe 40 FPS is a bit too ambitious, especially in like Dogtown and some of these more challenging areas. Some of these areas they didn't even attempt to bring to last generation consoles. But overall, I think it's a decent starting point for what is sure to be one of the most exciting ports in the system for sure in its early days.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Right, and with that, let's move back to our previously taped show. Okay, then, so moving on, we're going to be talking about the Metal Eden demo. Alex, you've taken a look at this on PC. This one's attracted a lot of attention because it's basically, pure, unrefined Unreal Engine 5. Looks really good. You've played it. Tell us more.
Well, the game is pretty cool. As you're looking at this B-roll of me playing on PC here, I only checked DLSS 4's Super Resolution Transformer model has been out for some time now, but with all the game releases as of late, I've not had the time to make any sort of detailed look into it specifically. Now that things have cleared up a bit, I finally sat down to take a look at DLSS 4 Super Resolution, and I specifically wanted to look into some lesser examined areas. Thanks to other channels covering it, and as I briefly touched on it in my FSR4 video, we already know DLSS 4's Transformer model can look a great deal better than DLSS 3's CNN model. But I wanted to see what DLSS 4 brings to the table for games and situations where the older DLSS model had larger issues. Those games and situations where we could see DLSS failing, and sometimes failing pretty hard. I wanted to look at those situations